Hello friends, today we will be discussing 10 questions from FMGE, its explanation and answers. Now let's go to the first question. The first question reads as, blinatumomab is a monospecific T-cell engager, bispecific T-cell engager, trispecific T-cell engager or a quadrispecific T-cell engager. Now this is a pretty easy question once you understand how does a blinatumomab acts. Now let's go to the explanation of it. So first let's take a B cell which is malignant or benign, that is it's a cancerous cell, right? Now this is a cell. Here at the surface it has something known as TAA, which are referred to as tumor associated antigen. The antigen of interest over here is CD19, right? You have our cells, that is the T cells. On the surface of T cells there are something known as CD3. Now this CD3, once it gets activated, it will activate the T cell, right? Now what did scientists do is, this is a protein, right? Against with this they developed a monoclonal antibody. Against this also they developed a monoclonal antibody. Now what did they do is, they took the variable region at both of these parts and then they linked it together with a linker. So they took this and they made one protein with a linker. So the first part is a CD19 part, we can say it as anti-CD19, and this is anti-CD3, right? Against both of these they develop monoclonal antibody, and then the starting part, that is the variable part, SCFV, the starting part, the variable part of both the heavy and the light chain, against both of these proteins they link together. So this became a drug. The drug is nothing but blinatumomab. So it is nothing but anti-CD19 CD3 monoclonal antibody. So what does it do? This links a tumor cell with a T cell. It links between these two. So characteristically this is referred to as a cytolytic synapse. That is, you know, these are the tumor cells. This is our effector cell, that is a T cell. Both of these are linked. That basically means the T cell will then be producing the perforin granzyme by which these cancer cells will get killed. Also T cell will get proliferated by which its army of T cells will get more and that will again kill it. And thirdly, the T cells will also produce inflammatory cytokines by which other cells also will be coming into the scenario, and all of them will together kill the cancerous cell. So this is how a bispecific T cell engager acts. So bispecific T cell engager is two bi. So you have a cancerous cell and a T cell engaging together by which its mechanism of action occurs. So with this I think you are clear with the answer. The answer is bispecific T cell engager. But let us go a bit deep into blinatumomab to see where it has been approved and also its adverse events. Blinatumomab have been approved for ALL B cell variant, because you are clear with it. Coming with the adverse events of it, the important adverse events alone you remember, two important things. In fact, these are the US black box warning. One is a cytokine release syndrome, occurring, just for your understanding, 17 to 15% of the patients given. And next is the neurotoxicity. So for this, if it occurs, you can give DEXA, and for this you can give corticosteroid. That's why, in fact, corticosteroids pre-medication is recommended before giving blinatumomab in order to avoid these things. In addition to that, it can also increase the rate of infection. It can cause rashes. It can cause edema, to name a few. Okay. Now, are there any other drug which is approved under this category? No, blinatumomab is the only drug. But we have one more drug which is upcoming now in the trials. Let's have a note of that name alone of that. The name is solitomab. So this is a EpCAM CD3 drug. The EpCAM is for the tumor. Over here it is the GI or the lung cancer, and CD3, as you all know, it's a part of the T cell. So it links between these two. So with that, let's go back to the question and just mark the answer. So the question is, blinatumomab is a monospecific T cell engager, bispecific T cell engager, trispecific or quadrispecific? The answer is bispecific T cell engager. Let's go to the next question. The next question, which is question number 2, reads as, which among the following is not a function of heparin? That is, inhibit the factor 10A, inhibit factor 2A, eliminated minorly by the kidney, and lastly inhibit antithrombin 3. So let's first understand that heparin being an anticoagulant, where does it come under the entire purview of anticoagulant? After that, let's go into this question. So it's a quick classification. So the anticoagulants can be broadly classified based on the way we are administering. That is, are we administering it parenterally, are we administering it orally? So within the parenteral, we have the indirect thrombin inhibitors and the direct thrombin inhibitors. So what does it mean? See, the indirect thrombin inhibitor basically means, just read out, indirect thrombin inhibitor. The thrombin is getting inhibited, but it is getting inhibited in an indirect fashion. How does it get indirectly inhibited? Is by means of enhancement of antithrombin 3. If antithrombin 3 is get enhanced, that's a protease which causes breakdown of 2A, 9A, 11A, 12A. So it causes breakdown of multiple coagulation factors, one among which is also the thrombin. So it is indirectly getting inhibited by means of antithrombin 3. So all those comes under indirect thrombin inhibitor. We will understand the indirect thrombin inhibitor, which is the heparin mechanism of action, detailedly in the next slide. Don't worry. But as of now, remember that indirect thrombin inhibitor inhibits the thrombin in an indirect fashion, whereas the direct thrombin inhibitor directly goes and inhibit the thrombin. Within the oral, it is going to be again the direct thrombin inhibitor or the factor 10A inhibitor, or it can be the coumarins, which are the warfarins, coumarin group of drugs, right? So within the indirect thrombin inhibitor, we have the heparin, low molecular weight heparin, which are the enoxaparins, and lastly the fondaparinux. So we will see about the mechanism of action in this in the next slide. Within the direct thrombin inhibitor, we have the lepirudin, argotraban, to name a few, argotraban. And within the direct thrombin inhibitor, which is the oral, we have the dabigatran. And within the factor 10 inhibitor, we have many drugs. Just to name one, it is rivaroxaban. And within the coumarin, we have obviously the warfarin. Okay. Now, let us go back to the question. The question is, it is saying that inhibit factor 10A, inhibit factor 2A, inhibit antithrombin 3, and lastly is the eliminated minorly by the kidney. One of the option is directly right. That is, it is eliminated minorly by the kidney, because majority the heparin gets eliminated by the reticuloendothelial system. That is why heparin is safe in case of patients with kidney failure. So this option is not a wrong option. They have asked to mark what is a wrong option. Now, in order to understand the remaining three options, I have just drawn a diagram. So if you see this diagram, this is the heparin structure. Okay. So within the heparin structure, you have a pentasaccharide over here below, and you have a large another peptide. This pentasaccharide is which acts as a seat for the sitting of antithrombin 3. As soon as the antithrombin 3, see, this is the antithrombin 3. As soon as this antithrombin 3 sits on the seat of pentasaccharide of a unfractionated heparin, okay, there occurs a change on the active site of the antithrombin 3. Are you able to see that over here it is C in shape, whereas over here it is triangular in shape? Okay, so that is the change in the active site, just to denote it. So that this change causes it to be ready to be bound with factor 10A. Okay, so the heparin has a pentasaccharide as well as a larger polysaccharide structure. Now, antithrombin 3 sits on the pentasaccharide. As soon as the pentasaccharide it sits, it changes the active site of the antithrombin 3, and then the factor 10A binds with it. Okay, but for the inhibition of thrombin 2A, there needs one more thing. That is, the remaining, other than this pentasaccharide, the remaining structure should encompass the binding of thrombin 2A as well as the antithrombin 3. Okay, so this encasement needs to occur. Once this encasement occurs, then the antithrombin 3 will get activated. So that means the thrombin 2A will get inhibited. So here what does heparin does is basically to enhance the function of antithrombin 3 rather than inhibit the structure of antithrombin 3. So this was a mistake in the question. They have written that inhibit antithrombin 3, but rather than it was enhance antithrombin 3. So that is the answer, because it also inhibits factor 10A, also it inhibits factor 2A, but it causes enhancement of antithrombin 3. That is how these two effects gets occurred. Okay, so now let's go back to the question. So the right answer over here is inhibit antithrombin 3, because that's right in the sense ki it's a wrong answer in the sense, but for this question it's a right answer. Let's go to the next question. The next question, which is the question number 3, reads as a nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibiting drug, which is a guanosine analog. So this is purely a memory based question, but with that also let's understand, like, why have they told an analog? So why is analog word used, or how does the anti-HAV drugs overall acts inside which the reverse transcriptase inhibitor, which are analogous in nature, how does it act? Let's have a fast overview. Without diagram, let me just explain in words. See, first of all, you have a HAV. On the surface of the HAV, you have what is known as the GP120 and the GP41, right? So this HAV attacks the lymphocytes, the CD4 cells. So the GP120 first binds with the CD4. After it binds, there occurs a change in the conformation, which then makes the binding of the core receptor like CCR5. After which the GP1 forms a tract by which the HAV gets in contact with the CD4 cell. Basically, the HAV will be sending its single-stranded RNA into the CD4. So, along with that, it also sends some enzyme. 3 important enzymes will be sending. One is the reverse transcriptase, second is the integrase, and third is the protease. Understand why it is so, why it is important, why are these 3 enzymes important. Reverse transcriptase, I said HAV is a single-stranded RNA, whereas HAV is attacking the human. Human contains the DNA. So, in order to convert this RNA into DNA, you need an enzyme. So that enzyme is nothing but the reverse transcriptase. After it has been converted, it needs to be integrated with the human DNA. For that, you require an enzyme known as integrase. So that is the function of integrase. And after it has been integrated, it will be producing the mRNA and then the proteins. These protein needs to be broken down so that it will be helping in budding a new HIV structure. So for that, you require an enzyme. So that is nothing but the protease. So all these three are inhibited by different drugs, right? Over here, for our question, the interest is one of the enzyme among these three, which is the reverse transcriptase. So let's go a bit deep, like how does a reverse transcriptase acts? So reverse transcriptase, if you see, transcriptase, if you see, can be broadly of two types. One is which are acting by competitive in nature or which are non-competitive. The word analog will be coming for this competitive drugs only. Over here, there is no analog. So what is over here? See, you know that single-stranded RNA will be converted into a proviral DNA, right? Now, this competitive reverse transcriptase, which are nothing but also known as nucleoside reverse transcriptase or nucleotide reverse transcriptase, are drugs which will compete with the normal adenosine, guanosine, thymidine or cytidine. It will compete with this and it will get incorporated. But if these drugs gets incorporated, they will be lacking what is known as the hydroxylant. That is, it will get incorporated, but at the level of incorporation itself, the elongation of the proviral DNA will be stopping. But non-competitive inhibitor, which are non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor, binds at an allosteric site and then inhibits the enzyme. So, right. So, over here it is non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor. Over here we have the nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor. So, I said these are analogs. So, 4 broad analogs it can be, right, in corresponds with the 4 different amino acids which are the components of the DNA. One, it can be adenosine, for which, or it can be guanosine, thymidine or cytidine. So, within the adenosine, what are the drugs which comes? Diadenosine. So, within the guanosine, what drug comes? Which is the abacavir. Within the thymidine, what drug comes? Zidovudine and stavudine. Within the cytidine, what drug comes? Zalcitabine, emtricitabine, lamivudine. There is one more drug which is tenofovir, which comes as a adenosine analog. It's a adenosine analog over here, but it is written differently. Why? Because it's a nucleotide. It's not a nucleoside. It already contains 3-phosphorus. So, what is this adenosine? It is adenine with base sugar and 2-phosphate, right? But still requires one more phosphate for its activation, for its effect to take place. Whereas tenofovir is already containing all the 3-phosphorus. So, that's why it's a nucleotide, whereas all these things are nucleoside. So, now let's go back to the question. So, you have the options. Ritonavir, no, because it's a protease inhibitor. Nevirapine, no, because it's a non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor. Abacavir, yes, it's a guanosine analog. Whereas zidovudine, as you all know, it's a thymidine analog. So, the answer is abacavir. Now let us go to the next question, which is question number 4. The question number 4 reads as, the rate limiting step in the synthesis of cholesterol pathway is inhibited by lovastatin, fenofibrate, exitamib or cholestyramine. Once we understand the mechanism of action of each one of this agent, this question will be easy. Now let's understand the mechanism of action of each one of the agent, starting with statins. So statin inhibits cholesterol synthesis. How does it inhibit cholesterol synthesis? By means of acting on an enzyme on the mevalonate pathway. So the pathway reads as acetyl-CoA combines with the acetyl-CoA by means of enzyme acetyl-CoA transferase, also known as thiolase. Acetyl-CoA. Now this then converts into HMG-CoA by means of HMG-CoA synthase. Then the HMG-CoA gets converted into mevalonic acid by means of an enzyme known as HMG-CoA reductase. Now on the downstream, mevalonic acid will be converted into cholesterol by means of multiple steps. Let's not go into it because the important thing which are from the pharmacological point of view has already been written. So here comes a direct question to you, whether statin acts at the level of synthase or reductase or thiolase. Obviously you would have definitely read before, so you will be narrowing that between HMG-CoA. Yes, HMG-CoA should be in the word, but whether it is going to be a synthase or reductase, the answer is reductase. Why? Because that is the rate limiting step. It is not the synthase. So there are other multiple MCQ which comes where they confuse with the option being both the synthase as well as reductase. Always remember, it causes inhibition of the HMG-CoA reductase, right? So with this, the answer of this particular question becomes right now itself clear. So the answer is going to be lovastatin, right? But let us also see the mechanism of action of other agents, starting with fenofibrate. So since fibrates have a bit complex mechanism of action, I have just drawn the diagram for you to better understand it. So if you see fibrates causes enhancement of an enzyme known as the lipoprotein lipase. So this is the important statement. How does it causes enhancement of lipoprotein lipase? By means of agonism of a PPAR alpha. But what is the role of this lipoprotein lipase? Let us understand it. First, if you are going to take exogenous cholesterol, the exogenous cholesterol is taken by means of chylomicron. The chylomicron on the periphery gets converted into chylomicron remnant. This conversion is by means of lipoprotein lipase. Similarly, the liver produces what is known as the VLDL. The VLDL on the periphery gets converted into LDL by means of lipoprotein lipase. So the enhancement of lipoprotein lipase helps in breakdown of both the chylomicron as well as VLDL into their remnant components so that it can be absorbed back into the liver. So this is being done by means of fibrates, by means of agonism with the law PPAR alpha. So fibrates is not the option of for this particular question. Next is exitamib. How does exitamib act? Exitamib will be acting at the level of intestine on MPC1L1. That's a transporter which is responsible for the uptake of the cholesterol. So it will be blocking at that particular level so that the cholesterol absorption from the intestine itself will be inhibited. So again, that is not the answer over here. Next is cholestyramine. Cholestyramine is a resin. So this resin binds with the bile acids. You know, bile acid undergoes what is known as the enterohepatic circulation. So if you give cholestyramine, these are the bile acid binding resin. It will bind to the bile acid. Along with that, there will be cholesterol also, and it will be taking cholesterol with the bile acids into the fecus. by which there will be occurring a reduction in the level of cholesterol. So again, cholestyramine is again not an option over here. So the answer over here stands as lovastatin. Now let us go to the next question, which is question number 5. The question number 5 reads as, methanol toxicity causes blindness due to the formation of formic acid, pyruvic acid, formaldehyde or lactic acid. So first and foremost, you should understand why at all a methanol toxicity takes place. Methanol is a component which is present in racing fluids, windshields. So let us say a person has accidentally taken this, because of which there has occurred a toxicity of methanol in his body. So this methanol, after it has entered into his body, will get metabolized. So the methanol will be converted into formaldehyde initially and then the formic acid later. This by means of an enzyme known as alcohol dehydrogenase, and this by means of an enzyme known as aldehyde dehydrogenase. And if you see this particular component, the formic acid, this is having ocular toxicity. So it can directly cause damage to the optic nerve. In addition, this formic acid can also cause inhibition of the mitochondrial respiration. So if it causes inhibition of the mitochondrial respiration, there will occur what is known as the tissue hypoxia. So if the tissue goes into hypoxia, the lactic acid level will be increasing. So that means that acidosis will be occurring. So with the acidosis, there will be occurring the circulatory failure, furthermore neurotoxicity, and the cycle will be keep on repeating by itself. So the formic acid is the component which is responsible for the methanol toxicity to cause blindness, right? So the answer over here is formic acid. Now let us also understand how do we treat this. This is being treated by means of giving a drug known as formimazole. Now this formimazole will be competing with the methanol for binding with the alcohol dehydrogenase, and it will be reducing the amount of alcohol dehydrogenase available for getting the metabolism of methanol, because only if the methanol gets metabolized, only then the formic acid will be formed. Only if formic acid gets formed, only then it is going to cause the ocular toxicity. So if the formimazole itself takes away the alcohol dehydrogenase, that means the metabolism is not going to take place. Or is there any other drug? Yes, there is one more drug known as ethanol. Both formimazole as well as ethanol can be given, but the drug of choice over here is formimazole. Now let us also understand the regimen of this. How does the formimazole's regimen occurs? So if you see formimazole, formimazole should be first given with a loading dose. The loading dose is 15 mg per kg. Okay. After this, you will be giving what is known as the dose of 10 mg per kg, 4 doses every 12th hourly. So that means you will be giving 4 doses every 12th hourly. After 4 doses is done, you will be then keep on repeating 15 mg per kg till the methanol levels falls below 20 milligram per deciliter, or let's say the patient have recovered fully clinically also, or let us say the neurotoxicity which visually have also come down. So this particular regimen you will be keep on repeating. Always remember, if you are going to learn some extra points about a particular drug or drug of choice, very important drugs, you are always bound to remember the minimum component nicely. So over here we read the methanol, how does it cause a toxicity, as well as its pathophysiology, and then the formapizole and also its regimen. So now let's go back to the question. The methanol toxicity causes blindness due to the formation of formic acid. Now let us go to the next question, which is question number 6. The question number 6 reads as, a patient who is hypertensive and diabetes developed cellulitis of the left leg due to Staphylococcus aureus, which was found to be resistant to methicillin on sensitivity testing of antibiotics. All the following antibiotics will be appropriate to be administered to this patient except. So basically they are asking the drugs which can be used for MRSA, right? So for this, you have a simple mnemonic. If you remember this mnemonic, this answer will be very easy. So the mnemonic stands as VT-DT-Cl. So V stands for vancomycin, T for teicoplanin, both are glycopeptide. Next is daptomycin, telavancin, ceftaroline, and lastly it is the linezolid. So if we see in our option, we have vancomycin, we have linezolid, we have teicoplanin, yes, but we don't have imipenem, because imipenem is a carbapenem which is predominantly given for specifically for gram-negative infections, and it is again a high-level antibiotic, but it has predominant action on gram-negative, not on MRSA. So the answer over here is imipenem. But before just going to the next question, let us learn a bit more on MRSA. Like, what is the drug of choice for MRSA? The drug of choice for MRSA is vancomycin. What is another drug which is as equivalent to that of vancomycin? To be more specific, it is non-inferior to vancomycin is daptomycin. So if you see the drug of choice, first the vancomycin, if not, it's there in the option, next is the daptomycin. Then what is the advantage of teicoplanin over vancomycin? Teicoplanin is going to be less nephrotoxic, whereas these agents are required to be conserved or not to be used for MRSA, because you have these agents as a last resort, as a salvage therapy. Let us say that MRSA you have vancomycin resistant, then you will be going for these agents as a salvage therapies for that particular agent. So I said in between one word, that is vancomycin resistant. So for vancomycin resistant VRSA, what are all the different antibiotics which can be given? So for VRSA, again remember the same group of agent, but obviously the vancomycin and the teicoplanin, remove it. It is not going to be there for VRSA, but all these agents along with some other drug, but that addition is very easy. You have telavancin, so in the same rhyme it is dalbavancin. You have linezolid, in the same rhyme the tedizolid. And there is going to be one more drug which is quinapristine, dalfopristin. So with this simple mnemonic, that is VT-DT-Cl, we have solved two important questions, the drugs which are used for MRSA as well as the drug which are used for VRSA. Now let us go to the next question, which is question number 7. So which antidiabetic drug acts by the inhibition of ATP sensitive potassium channel? The options are both sulfonylurea and meglitide, incretins, sulfonylurea alone, meglitide alone. So first to have a fast recap of what are all the drugs which comes under sulfonylurea, meglitide as well as incretins, so that we are clear in what aspect are we going to answer this particular question. So within sulfonylurea, it can either be the first generation or the second generation. So inside the first generation you have tolbutamide, chlorpropamide, all those drugs. Within the second you have glipizide, glibenclamide, all those drugs. Within meglinetide analog, you have ripaglinide, natiglinide, so next is the incretins, which are also known as the GLP-1 analog. So it can either be human or it can be reptile. So within human you have liraglutide, albiglutide, so within reptile we have exenatide, lixisenatide. So these drugs. So these are all the different classes of antidiabetic, right? But where does these drugs act? For that, let us understand the normal functioning of the pancreas. So within the pancreas, if you see, you have many cells, but two important cells in our point of view over here, the alpha cells, another the beta cells. The alpha cells will be producing what is known as a glucagon, which will be causing increase in glucose, right? The beta cells will be producing the insulin, which will be causing what is known as the decrease in glucose, okay? Now, this ATP sensitive potassium channel, where do they come? The glucose, as we are taking into the food, the glucose get absorbed. So that glucose then enters into the pancreas using a transporter, which is the GLUT2 transporters. So as it enters through the GLUT2, it gets glycolized and the ATPs are formed. Now this ATP will cause inhibition of ATP sensitive potassium channel to cause depolarization. So this depolarization is responsible for the influx of calcium and then it will be causing release of insulin, right? Now you have ATP inhibition causing depolarization. This inhibition is what is also done by our drugs, that is the sulfonylurea as well as meglitinide. Both causes inhibition of ATP sensitive potassium channel, so that the depolarization will be occurring and the insulin release will be occurring. So both of these drugs acts through the same mechanism of action. Now you have incretins also to cause insulin release, but how do they act? They don't act through this, they act through a GS subtype of a G protein coupled receptor which is present on the pancreas. So they act through that particular G protein coupled receptor and it causes its effect. It does not cause using the ATP sensitive potassium channel. So the answer over here is just sulfonylurea and meglitinide causes inhibition of ATP sensitive potassium channel. So the right answer over here is option number A, which is both sulfonylurea as well as meglitinide. Now let us go to the next question, which is the question number 8. All the diuretic increases K plus excretion except, the options are acetazolamide, thiazide, triamtrene, furosemide. So whenever you get these type of question, you should immediately try to fix these particular agents into the broader picture of classification. So where does each of these agents falls? So let's have a quick recap. Acetazolamide is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. It is going to act at the level of proximal convoluted tubule. Thiazide acts at the level of distal convoluted tubule and inhibits sodium chloride symporter. Then furosemide is going to be a loop diuretic which is going to act at the level of thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle and it is going to be an inhibitor of sodium potassium 2 chloride transporter. Triamtrene is going to act at the level of collecting tubule and it is going to be a ENaC inhibitor. But triamtrene also had one more name. So what is that? That is a potassium sparing diuretic. So why it has got a name known as potassium sparing? Because it spares the excessive release of potassium. So if you remember this particular word, that is a potassium sparing diuretic, this is a very easy answer. That is, answer over here is triamtrene. Why? Because it does not cause excessive release of potassium. But let us go a bit deeper and understand why does triamptine does not cause potassium release. For that, you should understand first and foremost the normal functioning of the collecting tubule. Now, this is a collecting tubule. Here you have a cell, a ENaC channel, which causes influx of the sodium. So, as the influx of the sodium is occurring, there will be occurring what is known as a depolarization. The depolarization means excessive positive charge on the inner side. So, in order to match up this excessive positive charge, there will be release of the positive ions. So, what are the positive ions? What is the predominant positive ion in our body? In the intracellular, it is potassium. So, the potassium will be released using the ROMK channels. ROMK channels in the case of principal cells, and also there will be some release of the H plus using the H plus KTPase, but that is in the type A intercalated cells. So, both of these try to match the excessive depolarization which has occurred following the influx of sodium, right? Now, in the presence of an ENaC inhibitor, the ENaC inhibitor will be inhibiting the sodium influx. That basically means the membrane will not get depolarized. If the membrane will not get depolarized, there won't be excessive positive charge inside. So, if the excessive positive charge is not in the inner side, there does not require the release of either potassium or the H plus. So, the loss of potassium is not going to occur. That is why ENaC inhibitor will not cause loss of potassium. But if you want to understand this question fully, you should also understand why does these other agents, that is acetazolamide, thiazide as well as the furosemide, causes excessive release of potassium. These are because these act at the level which is above collecting tubule. So, whenever these agents are inhibiting their solute absorption over there will be occurring increased amount of sodium which will be coming down the stream. Down the stream in the sense, first proximal convoluted tubule, next the thick ascending limb, next the distal convoluted tubule, and last is going to be the collecting tubule. So, there will be more amount of sodium which will be coming downstream. So, when more amount of sodium is coming downstream, these sodium will be getting influxed through the ENaC channel. There will be occurring more amount of membrane depolarization. If more amount of membrane depolarization is occurring, I said the ROMK channels as well as H plus KTPase will be eliminating the sodium, will be eliminating the potassium as well as the H plus. So, there will be occurring loss of potassium. So, this is how drugs which are acting upstream causes loss of potassium, thereby hypokalemia. Let's go to the next question, which is question number 9. The question number 9 reads as, which of the following statement is true regarding ticlopidin? Whether it is GP2B3A antagonist, whether it decreases ADP mediated interactions, whether it is an irreversible COX-1 inhibitor, or whether it is vitamin K antagonist. So, in order to understand this particular question, let us first understand the mechanism of action of different antiplatelet agents, starting with the physiology of the normal platelet adhesion and aggregation. So, you have a blood vessel over here, it's on the inner part of the blood vessel, so in which it has exposed the collagen and as well as the von Willebrand factor. So, you have one platelet represented. So, the collagen receptor on the surface as well as the von Willebrand receptor on the surface gets activated by means of combining with this. All these causes downstream increase of the calcium within the platelets. The increase in the calcium causes export of dense granules containing different mediators, one of the important mediator being ADP. The ADP will then be acting on the ADP receptor, which are nothing but the P2Y12 receptors, to cause further increase of the calcium, also the activation of the platelets. In addition, the increase of calcium causes activation of the prostaglandin pathways, all of which leads to increased amount of thromboxane synthesis. The thromboxane acts on the thromboxane receptor to cause further platelet aggregation. The platelet also has on the surface the GP2B3A. Now, these GP2B3A are which are responsible for the aggregation by means of combining with the fibrinogen, that is fibrins. How does this fibrin comes? Because fibrin is a part of the coagulation pathway, right? So that is also activated by platelet. How? The surface exposed of platelet causes activation of the coagulation pathway. So from that you have the thrombin gets activated. From the thrombin you have the fibrinogen get converted to fibrin. So now let's see the different antiplatelet agent. Where does each one of that act? So GP2B3A inhibitor will be acting over here. So you have the drugs ABC-iximab, tirofiban, ep, tifibatide. So next are the P2Y12 receptor inhibitor irreversible, the clopidogrel, ticlopidin. You also have a reversible inhibitor of it, which are the ticagrelor, cangrelor, and over here in the option we also had irreversible COX-1 inhibitor. It is done by aspirin, but it will be acting at the COX-1 of this particular pathway, inhibiting the production of TXA2. So you have the aspirin acting over here. So last we had one more option, which is vitamin K antagonist. Vitamin K antagonist is basically warfarin, right? So warfarin acts at the level of oxidized vitamin K, gets converted into reduced vitamin K, VKORC1. So this particular enzyme is being inhibited by warfarin, because this reduced vitamin K then causes activation of gamma carboxylase enzyme, which in turn causes activation of 2,7,9,10 factors of the coagulation pathway, right? So the answer over here is ticlopidin. It is a irreversible P2Y12 inhibitor and it decreases ADP mediated interactions. Now let us go to the next question, which is question number 10. Which among the following is not a PCSK9 inhibitor? So the options are evolocumab, alirocumab, bococizumab and pertuzumab. So for answering this particular question, first and foremost you should understand what is PCSK9 and where does this particular group of agents come. The PCSK9 comes under hypolipidemic agents. Let us understand how does PCSK9 inhibitor acts. PCSK9 are normal proteins which are actually produced from the liver. Now these PCSK9 competes with the normal LDL to get attached to the LDL receptor, right? So as it is competing and getting attached with the LDL receptor, it generally wins because its affinity to the LDL receptor is more as compared to that of LDL itself. So it gets internalized, the PCSK9 LDL receptor gets internalized and it causes the endosomes binds with the lysosomes to form the endolysosomes and it causes breakdown of the LDL receptor. LDL receptor are required. Why? Because LDL receptor causes absorption of the chylomicron triminate as well as the LDL and helps in reducing the cholesterol levels in the body. Now, if the LDL receptor is getting broken down, that basically means you don't have much amount of receptors present for the absorption of chylomicron triminate as well as the LDL. Now, in order to tackle this, scientists have developed monoclonal antibody against this PCSK9. So that these monoclonal antibody gets bind to the PCSK9 and it will cause lesser amount of fight for the LDL getting attached to the LDL receptor. So since these monoclonal antibody have got attached to PCSK9, the LDL is now free to get attached to the LDL receptor. If the LDL gets attached to the LDL receptor, these LDL will be released inside and the LDL receptor now will not be destroyed, rather will be recycled back. That is, you have the LDL getting delivered inside also and you have the LDL receptor which are getting recycled also. That means LDL receptor concentration also will be more. So ultimately you will be having the hypolipidemic effect getting established. Now, the agents which are actually acting against this are 3 drugs. All the 3 are in the option. One is evolocumab, alirocumab and the bococizumab. So, only the odd man left out is pertuzumab. So, what is pertuzumab? Pertuzumab, by the way, is a HER2 monoclonal antibody. Okay. And you have already read about one important HER2 antibody, right? What is that? Trastuzumab. So, what is the difference between a hertuzumab and a trastuzumab? Now, let us have a small look of it. If you have the HER2 receptor over here, now these consist of 4 different domains, right? The pertuzumab inhibits the domain 2, which is also known as the dimerization domain. It gets inhibited, whereas the trastuzumab inhibits the domain 4. So, this domain 2 dimerization domain is responsible for the dimerization between the 2 HER2 receptor. These dimerization are important. Why? Because only after the dimerization of the HER2 receptor, the downstream pathway gets activated. So, this pertuzumab inhibits the dimerization. By that way, it will be causing inhibition of the downstream growth factor pathway, by which it brings about an effect. Where it is given? It is given in the case of breast cancer. Right? So, we have this question solved, which is pertuzumab is the answer. Thank you.